Welcome, my name is Lapierre. I'm the founder of the International Institute of Equine Podiatry. I want to thank you for inviting me into your home and into your barn so that I may introduce you to the HPT Method. The HPT Method is our tool for the application of equine podiatry. Why don't we take a few minutes to step into the classroom so that I may review our theories, and then we'll get underneath the horse and get to the trim. So let's get started. What I'd like to do is start with a review of the principles behind applied equine podiatry. I hope that you took the time to review our first video, the introductory to applied equine podiatry. And what I would like to do is mention the principles that we follow so that we don't get into trouble with our horses if we decide to trim our own horses. Number one, we have to remember that the most important rule of thumb is do no harm. Whenever we go to work on a horse, we are reviewing a number of things that are extremely important. We look at the environment that the horse is in. We want to look at the condition, the overall condition of the horse. We're going to look at those hooves and those feet and make sure that we have the structures we need to apply a trim. There is a stimulus to create that structure. If we do not have proper structure, we will not have proper function. There is no way we can achieve performance from the horse. Remember that formula. Structure plus function equals performance. Again, please understand that you have to have a good understanding of the theories that we base the model on in order to use the tool. Simply applying a trim is not going to do the trick. What I like to do is go over the 10 steps of the method quickly, and then we can go over what we call the spectrum of usability. The spectrum of usability allows us to place that hoof on a spectrum that will keep us from exceeding that spectrum and creating trauma. It is establishing an environment for that foot that will produce the stimulus within a healthy range so that we don't have abscessing, we don't have bruising. You have to understand if the structure is lacking, we have a real problem, because if we create trauma, obviously we can't produce healthy tissue. Now let's take a look. We'll look at the steps to the trim. We begin with the frog, one of the most important structures in the horse's foot, which will help to stimulate growth of the lateral cartilages, the digital cushions, the bar, and what we call the angle of the bar, or the heel contact with the ground. The frog we address by simply centering it up on the center line and creating a slight angle to the frog within a triangle of the footprint so that we have the appropriate amount of pressure not only to the frog, but it also allows for pressure to the bars. That angle is a slight angle, about a 45-degree angle, which you'll see I will apply when we get to the trim. We move to step 2 is to find the live sole at the widest part of the footprint. I'm going to outline the footprint on the horse so that you can see us map out the foot during the method. We find 2 points on the live sole at the widest part of the foot, which will help us to determine the depth of the sole over the coffin bone, both medial and lateral, or right to left of the foot. We use that in conjunction with a point at the highest and widest point on the frog to create a plane which we call the live sole plane. There are a total of 3 planes that we use in the method. 2 of those are physical planes. One of those planes is created by taking the 2 points, 1 point found at that high and wide point on the frog, and the 2 points at the live sole, to create what we call the live sole plane. The live sole plane is a plane that mimics the plane of the internal arch. We don't concern ourselves with the angle of the coffin bone, because what we really are trying to do is create a healthy arch to the internal structures of the foot. By using the live sole plane as our plane, we can trim the hoof capsule to the footprint or the internal arch. Once we have established our live sole plane, using our rasp as our gauge, if you will, or as our plane, we will mimic that by rasping the heels to a point slightly above the frog. Again, we'll review this all under the horse when we're doing the actual trim. That creates a plane called the heel plane. Our first physical plane. The plane is balanced on 4 dimensions. With a review of our tape on theory, you'll see that we balance to 4 planes. We balance to medial to lateral, which is our hoof capsule balanced on the right to left plane of the center line, or medial to lateral. We also balance front to back of the hoof, or dorsal to palmar, so that our hoof capsule is balanced to the coffin joint front to back. A third balance is our distal to proximal balance, which is up and down, or farthest from and closest to the head of the horse, which is on both planes, medial and lateral and dorsal palmar. And our fourth dimension is yaw, which is rotational balance, which will have our hoof capsule centered on the center line so that we don't have breakover off to one side or the other, or our heel one forward of the other. We make sure that our hoof capsule is balanced in yaw to the foot. 4 physical dimensions. Once we have established those 4 physical dimensions using the live sole plane, we physically create those dimensions in the heels. What we're trying to do in the heels is create heel purchase, or surface area, at the angle of the bar. A better term for heel plane is actually angle of the bar. We're creating a heel plane at the angle of the bar. That's the point where the heel and the bar meet. So we want as much purchase there as possible. Ideally, we want that angle of the bar to be about the widest part of the frog, or located at the widest part of the frog. The next step is step 4, where we move into the bars. And the bars have really had, there's been a lot of attention paid to bars in a number of other methods and trims that are going on. And what we have found is if we simply lower the bars to a plane that is parallel to or follows that of the concavity of the live sole, we can create the proper stimulus, almost like a ski slope, leaving purchase in the heels. And the reason it's important to follow the steps, here's one example. If we do the bars prior to doing the heel plane, we may be taking away needed material to create the purchase at the angle of the bar. So we always do the bars after the heels. You should be comfortable with being within step. Don't step out. In other words, don't try to go to the toe or any other part of the trim. Stay in step. We're building balance in the hoof capsule to promote the proper stimulus to the internal arch. And if we step out of sequence here, you're going to lose that balance. It's very important. Always following that premise, do no harm. We never remove structure that's required. In other words, if we have a heel, for instance, where one can be taken down to the proper height, and the other one happens to be lower due to whatever the problem might be, some type of pathology, we never lower good structure to balance to bad structure. You will never remove good structure if it's placed there by nature in response to the lack of structure elsewhere in the hoof. You always work within the environment to create the structure before removing good structure to balance to bad. It's an important thing to remember. The next step is quite simple. We go to the quarters and we work forward of the heel, and we're going to show you, I'm going to put up here a diagram of the bottom of the hoof showing the anatomy so that you will understand what each structure is as we progress here. If you look, we see the quarters, and we're going to lower the quarters, which start just forward of the angle of the bar. And we're going to relieve the quarters with a slight angle to our rasp, and the angle on the rasp depends on the type of wall we have. For instance, if we have a horse with a hoof with a lot of flare, we may start with a very open angle in respect to the bottom of the foot and close it as we come in closer to where we want to be, which is just outside the inner wall. The top edge of our angle should stop at the inner wall, and we should progress around the hoof capsule, relieving the outer wall, exposing the inner wall. The next step is to go to the toe. Here we're going to address our dorsal to palmar plane in the toe. We're actually going to back our toe up. We're not too concerned with lowering the toe at this point. Our main concern is to make sure that we bring that toe back so that we're addressing the dorsal aspect of the dorsal palmar balance. We've already addressed the dorsal to palmar balance in the heel plane, so now we're going to do it in the toe. We started about 10 and 2, and we're going to show you mapping out the foot under the horse, how to establish where the toe is on each foot of the horse. So we're going to establish our toe. We're going to start at it's approximately 10 and 2, and we're going to create an angle of about 45 degrees in relationship to the bottom of the foot and rasp from one point to the other, bringing the toe back until we expose the inner wall. The top edge of our angle will actually be about 2/3 of the way through the inner wall. Not to the white line, but 2/3 of the way into the inner wall. Once we've established our toe, we now have symmetry around the hoof capsule, and we're going to go to the toe plane. This is where we establish our second physical plane. We're going to lower the toe plane on the distal to proximal plane to a plane parallel to the heel plane at the same height as that heel plane. So we're going to lower the toe now so that we have a plane that's parallel to our heel plane, and we establish the toe plane. The next step is to go to the top of the hoof capsule. We're going to do flare. And we're going to use the 1/2 inch below the hairline as our plane, or our reference of plane, so that we take off all of the flare down the hoof capsule. The hoof wall should be a smooth plane from just below the coronary band to the ground. It's an easy step. What we are going to do is be very careful not to remove needed structure. Remember, there's a golden rule, and I had mentioned it, and I didn't quite give it the importance that I should, so I'm going to do that now. We never remove structure that's there due to lack of structure elsewhere in the foot. Nature put that structure there for a reason, to stabilize the hoof capsule in response to it. On the other hand, if the extra structure there, or the structure in excess, such as a flare, is there due to imbalance in the foot, and we have created balance through the method, then we can safely remove that structure. So we have to be very careful as to the amount of structure. Once we finish flare, we go back to the bottom of the hoof and the foot, and it's simply a matter of moving forward of the angle of the bar and establish an angle relieving the outer wall, making the hoof print symmetrical to the footprint. We can show you that right on the horse. It won't be a problem. And the last step, which everybody loves, is simply to take a sanding block, take off all the sharp edges in the Mustang roll. The entire bottom of the foot is sanded smooth, and we have a nice smooth hoof, and we're done with the method. What we need to do now is make sure that we follow that premise, do no harm. In order to do that, what I've done is create a spectrum of usability. The spectrum of usability would allow you to take a look at the structures that you have, place them on the spectrum, and be confident that you're not exceeding that spectrum so that you don't create trauma. That'll just prolong the pain that the horse is in. It'll take much longer to return our structures. So what we're going to do is establish an environment that's conducive to healing by not exceeding the spectrum of usability. Let's take a look at the spectrum of usability as I referenced it in The Chosen Road, Achieving High Performance to Applied Equine Podiatry. There you will see that I have taken and created a spectrum on 0 to 10. And if you would take the first numbers, 0 through 4, and reference it by age, if you will, on the horse, what would you be doing with a 1-year-old? Well, most of us are not going to be doing much other than some groundwork, maybe some walking of the foal, and that's about it, or the yearling. As the horse becomes 2, we might start doing more groundwork, some round pen work, but we're still not on the horse's back. If we reference that to the structures of the horse's foot, if we have a frog that's a 2, it's obviously a horse that cannot handle the weight of a rider. As we progress in age, we get to a 3-year-old. That's a horse that we may be on his back doing some school work. We're in the ring. We're working in a good sand arena. There's a frog that, or a wall or a sole that cannot take excessive amount of pounding, cannot take a gravel trail, but can easily work in a school, a sand ring. So as we progress up on our spectrum, so will the structures need to be much healthier. We're looking at horses that come in at about a 5 or a 6 on the spectrum that we would use for our trail riding or our average horse, our backyard riding horses, which, by the way, when we do a survey on farriers as to what horses they are treating, most farriers have referenced that 98% of the horses that they are treating are backyard horses. If that's the case, a 5 or a 6 on the spectrum is a healthy foot for our backyard horse for the person that wants to go on the average trail ride. If we decide that we want to do competitive trail riding, or if we want to do reining as a discipline, or we progress up into eventing or jumping, in order to achieve that high performance in the foot, we need structures that are at the 7 or 8 level on the spectrum of usability. That is an extremely healthy foot. And the only way you can develop your spectrum of usability is by looking at numerous hoofs, looking at the entire foot, not just the hoof. You'll see when we reference the wild feral horse, most of our reference is to the hoof capsule and not to the individual structures. What we've done in the spectrum of usability is taken 7 individual structures, and they are the frog, the sole, the bars, the wall, the toe, the lateral cartilages. Each of those structures we look at and determine if they are high enough on the spectrum of usability. Actually, we put them on the spectrum of usability, add them together, and divide by that number so that we come up with a spectrum of usability for that individual foot. If you do not exceed the spectrum of usability and establish a rehabilitation program, if you will, or an exercise program that applies the stimulus we need to return the structures that are lacking, we can achieve health in the foot faster, with less trauma to the horse, and we have been very successful in less than 6 months, even with the most severe of pathologies and problems, returned healthy structure and progressed towards a healthier overall horse. That's why it's called whole health hoof care. We're looking at the entire horse, but we have to have a good foot to begin with. Whether you're going to shoe later down the road for your discipline, that's a call you have to make, but use the spectrum of usability so that we are safe in what we do. We do not do harm. We're going to take a look at a number of hoof capsules. I have a half a dozen hoofs here that we're going to take a look at that represent, well, from the worst to a good hoof, probably something around a 5 or a 6 on the spectrum, from about a 2 or a 3 on the spectrum. So it'll give you a good idea as to look at these structures. A couple of them have shoes on, so you can see the deformity that we tend to see from shoeing, from the stimulus that a shoe creates. Not all shoeing, different types of shoes will create different stimulus, and we see different deformations in the foot. We see the foot deforming differently. We call that DHS. Syndrome, and it ranges from very mild DHS, such as a simple flare, to severe DHS that we see in the chronic foundered horse. So we're going to take a look at some of these hoofs. We'll point that out to you. Now let's take a look at some hooves so you can start developing your own spectrum of usability. Understand, like a database, until you start looking at a lot of hooves, you're not going to have a very large database. Whereas I have been looking at horses over the last 20 years, from the wild horse to the domestic horse, from a show jumper to a race horse and to the backyard pleasure horses from all over the world, yours is going to be relatively small. An example is when I looked at a horse, a thoroughbred in upstate New York, that I thought had very poor feet. The owner was very upset when I told her it was a 3 on the scale when she had just had it vetted out. The veterinarian told her that if every horse had feet like that horse, he probably would have a lot less business. Well, when I asked who the vet was a Saratoga racetrack vet. So his spectrum of usability was one thoroughbred to the next with a very small spectrum. Well, we have to start increasing our spectrum, and I'm going to start, and what I'd like to do is I want to introduce my wife, Robin Lapierre, who has been working with me for the last 2 years and is co-founder of the Institute and has been trimming for 5 years. And hi, Robin.
Hello.
We're going to take a look at these hooves, and I asked Robin to hold them because her spectrum is very large. She understands the spectrum, and as I refer to these various structures on this hoof, we can take a look and put them on a spectrum to start. I came out first with a hoof that I would consider to be about, a 4.5, 5, maybe even a little better. And when we look at it and looking at the structures, we can look first at the frog. When we look at the frog, we see it's very, very wide. There is not a deep central sulcus. It's a relatively shallow central sulcus. And even though it has a curve to it, as we come back from the apex back to the heel, you can see there's a curve. Well, that we're trying to eliminate, and we'll do that by getting proper trimming on it. We can trim a slight angle to the edge of the frog that follows back, but we do not want to do opening cuts. If we put our pointer back at the end of the frog at the collateral groove, you'll see that there's a curve. That curve is mirrored in the corium of the foot that produces that part of the frog. We do not want to open that up because it relieves the stresses there, or it cuts back on the resistance that we need to stabilize the foot. So this is a relatively good foot. We go from the frog to the sole, and you can see that we have some concavity. There is some exfoliation. We don't want an excessive amount of exfoliation, but that just tells us that the foot is a fairly thick sole. It's not too bad. When we get to the bars, let's go to the angle of the bars, or the heel. Angle of the bar is the ground surface. After I trim this foot and we look at the purchase in the heel, we'll have a much larger ground surface or purchase, and it will be the most farthest aspect of it, the most palmar aspect of the heel will be about parallel to the widest part of the frog. That is what we're looking for. As we progress to the quarters, there's not a lot of chipping. We do see we have overgrowth of the wall, and the white line isn't the healthiest, but the wall itself is not too bad. When we progress to the toe, which is from about 10 to 2, we can see that the breakover is slightly to the outside, which is quite normal. That's not a problem. This horse has probably been turned out for the past 8 weeks, and it's developed a trim, which would be considered a natural trim, if you will, where we see our breakover and the quarters are starting to break away, and we've got good heel purchase. When we go from the toe, we're going to turn the foot over and take a look at the hoof wall itself. The hoof wall is what we normally look at in traditional farrier sciences, and you can see there's not a lot of evidence of growth rings. We can see that the tubules run relatively straight down the wall. There's not a lot of flare. It's not too bad a foot. We can see where there's some work been done on it with a rasp, but there's not a lot of flare. We see some deviations, but not too bad. It's a relatively good hoof wall with little cracking. On this medial side, on this lateral side, we can see there are a few more growth rings in the quarters, and there's some chipping in the quarter. Quite normal. The angle of the heel isn't too bad. It's not a low heel. It's a good overall foot. We go back and look at the lateral cartilages, and we will take a look at the width of the lateral cartilages. From looking across the width of the foot, we want to have about 1/3 of lateral cartilage on each side. And if we palpitate, we can feel the lateral cartilage coming over the back, and you can see the movement of my lateral cartilage on both sides. This is important because when our pastern descends, it will actually create pressure on our vein, artery, and nerve, which pass right behind our lateral cartilage. In a poor configured foot, these lateral cartilages would be more upright. What we're looking for is this tight, compact roll of the lateral cartilage taking up the majority of the back part of the foot, so we have 1/3 on each side. And the center here is a digital cushion, and we can feel that the digital cushion is relatively firm. We don't have that deep central sulcus, therefore it doesn't have infection. It's a relatively stable foot. What we do not want is a lot of movement in the foot. We want to make sure that it's stable, and this foot is a relatively stable foot. So even though it hasn't been trimmed in some time, it shows us that it has the structures we need to place it about a 5 on the spectrum of usability. We add each one of the structures together. The frog is about a 4.5 to 5. Our bars and heels, we're looking at a 4.5 to 5. Our sole is a 5. Our wall is about a 5. All of them added together, our lateral cartilage is the same. So when we add them all together, divide them by that number, and we end up with a 5. So we do that on all 4 feet, and it would give us a good idea as to where we could use this horse and not exceed that spectrum. If for some reason it had an injury or an abscess in the sole, that would drop it way down in the spectrum. Let's take a look at a couple more feet. Robin's going to step out and bring me a second foot. I think what we're going to do now is take a look at a very young foal. Now what we have here is a very young horse. This is probably about 5-month-old horse. When we take a look at it, Robin, if you just show them the frog, you can see the central sulcus is not as deep, so we're going to go right around this one relatively quickly. The frog is going to come in somewhere around a 4.5, maybe even a little less, about a 4 because it is so young. We're looking at the sole, which is a healthy sole. It's about a 3.5 to 4, maybe even a 5. We'll look at the angle of the bar. They're a bit forward. Here we see where they're forward of the widest part of the foot, so we're starting to drop on our spectrum, okay, because they're forward. So we want them back there as opposed to where they are, so we're looking at about a 3. Our bars are bent because of the weak frog. We have bent bars, and our heels have moved forward, so our bars are bent. We're about a 3. The wall comes in about a 3. The toe is about a 3. Overall, we're going to come in at about a 3.5. If I look at lateral cartilages, the lateral cartilages are fairly healthy, but on a very young horse, they're not going to be as developed, but we're still looking at healthy lateral cartilages. Okay, so overall, we're looking at a 3.5. We're not going to be doing much with this horse. Obviously, being a young horse, very, very little. All right, just to start you on your spectrum of usability so you can see where we're going. So we've gone from a 5 to a 3.5. Now I've had Robin bring this foot forward because I want you to look at the damage that's been done. Remember, our premise is to do no harm. We don't have a very healthy frog. We've got a lot of infection. The bars have been actually broken and taken away. Our sole, if you look, Robin, if you point to those right here so they can see it, we've got some gouging where concavity has been created. So we dropped this way down. We're looking at about a 2.5 to 3 on the frog, down around a 2 on the sole because structure's been removed. The bars are weak. We have very little to no purchase in the heels whatsoever. You can see they're not even back to where they should be. There's no purchase to support this foot. When we look at the wall, one thing that's interesting that you couldn't see on the other one is where the in wall is evidenced. The non-pigmented wall outside of the white line is evidenced here. You can see that there's very little to none in the quarters. It gets very thin through the quarters, and there is none whatsoever in the angle of the bar. So it drops the wall way down to below a 3 or a 3.5 at the most. When we look at the toe itself, nature has responded by increasing the thickness of the outer wall to deal with all of the distortion that occurs. If you can point to the tubules in the outer wall, you'll see how thick the outer wall is. That's why we're always chasing that toe in these horses that don't develop good inner wall in the back. This foot comes in around a 2.5 to 3. If you were to ride this horse on anything other than a soft sand arena, I wouldn't even ride this horse. This horse would basically be used for hand walking. We would develop the structures we need. A therapeutic styrofoam pad taped to the bottom of this foot or in a boot that is coming out would help. We're going to show you what they are so that we can develop the correct stimulus for the bottom of this foot. This is about a 2.5 or a 3 on the spectrum, a very poor hoof, and most of it has been created by doing harm in the trim. I want to show you what the lateral cartilages look like on a really poor hoof. If we tilt this way forward so we can see these lateral cartilages, I can get in here. Now these are almost upright with about 20% on each side of this hoof in the back of this foot, and they're very soft. There's very little support whatsoever. Our digital cushion is very weak, so our lateral cartilages are very poor, corresponding to the rest of the structures in the foot. This is about a 3, a 2.5, not a very good foot. You don't exceed that spectrum, hand walking only, and we progress from there. When we take a look at this hoof, you can see that there's a major amount of infection in the frog. You can see there's pockets, and Robin will show how deep our central sulcus is. It's extremely deep, which sets the foot up for instability. It just wants to constantly flex excessively. We'll have to take care of that with what we call Clean Tracks, which is a non-necrotizing hoof cleanser, and then we'll progress from there. But that makes the frog about a 1.5 to 2, very low. We go from that to the angle of the bar, and you'll see that the heels are so far forward. We've got 1.5 inches of heel on this horse, and even though it is so long, it is very low. So they should be back parallel to that widest part of the frog, as you can see, and they are over 1 inch forward. Even after filing them down to where they should be, which we can't do much because of this hoof, they would still be too far forward. The bars themselves are very weak and broken and totally curved because the heels have come in due to the lack of structure in the frog area. We look at the sole. It's got good concavity. Nature's kind of laying down that sole and giving us a good tough sole because of the lack of stability in the back 2/3 of the foot. When we look at the wall, there's very little inner wall. The wall isn't a very good quality wall at all. And the toe, as before, is the best part of the foot because nature's trying to stabilize a weak foot. When we look at the lateral cartilages on this horse, you'll see they're like the other horse we had mentioned, very upright, very weak. Digital cushion is very, very weak. So we have poor digital cushion. This horse has about a 2.5 for a foot, a 3. We'll need to pad this horse with a therapeutic pad, perhaps our Soulmate therapeutic hoof pads, which is a good pad to use, so that we can apply the pressure without creating trauma. Remember, do no harm. This is not a horse that we can do a full trim on, but it is about a 2.5, and we'll have to rehabilitate this horse's foot through the use of pads and exercise. Now, we brought in this shod hoof for a reason. It is actually a well-shod hoof. The nails are forward of the widest part of the hoof, is traditionally what we would want. It has plenty of expansion and contraction, or allows for expansion and contraction by allowing the shoe to come back to the bulbs of the heels. So traditionally, it's a well-shod horse. But when we look at the hoof itself, we can see what's being done here. Robin, if you point to that frog for me, you can see the deep central sulcus, and this horse may go sound with the shoe, but there's a reason. It is stabilizing the foot. That's what the shoe is doing. It's actually an artificial structure stabilizing the hoof. That doesn't help with healing in any way. We need to get rid of that infection, and we need to provide the stimulus to get the healthy structure. Let's turn the foot over for a minute so you can see that it is a relatively well-shod horse. We have expansion through the shoe, which is what traditionally we want. The clips are placed fairly well. We've got breakover. We don't have a lot of flare, and the angle of the wall follows that of the pastern. Again, it's a relatively well-shod horse, but it does no good whatsoever in rehabilitating this foot. We can't even place it on a spectrum of usability because we can't see all the structures. So if I were to pull this out of shoes, based on the frog and the deep central sulcus, it's probably going to be quite far down. We can see it has a heel crack and a bar crack that he's trying to support with the shoe. He's floated, what we call floated the heel, which is here. You see a space. All of the things that we traditionally do in reaction to a problem. What equine podiatry is proactive. This is reactive. We have to correct that problem. We can't do it with the shoe. We need to get that shoe off. I brought back the first hoof that we brought out. It was a 5, I had mentioned, and we always do the spectrum of usability prior to the trim. And the reason is it teaches us how to look at the structures as they appear when we first get to the horse. I've lowered the heels, and they're back at about the widest part of the hoof. As you can see, the central sulcus, as we said, wasn't deep. We put a slight angle and the curve on the frog. This will help hold dirt in this area to promote the pressure we need for the bars. The bars are level and have a very sharp edge. Robin, I want you to take that hoof pick and you can show them that sharp edge, which it follows the concavity of the sole so we get correct pressure on our bars. The wall, we relieve the outer wall so that our inner wall is exposed to the ground, so that we're carrying weight, bearing weight on the inner wall, the white line, and the sole or the tubules that are produced by the terminal papillae at the border of the coffin bone. You can see there's a slight bit of seedy toe. There may be problems with the hoof, but time would tell. It's a very healthy foot. We've taken care of pretty much what we need to take care of, and we can progress on and even make this a 6 or a 7 if we needed to in the correct environment. Before we begin the trim, we should be taking a look at our tools to make sure that they're sharp and ready to go. We have chosen this drop blade knife to use to do the HPT method. The drop blade coming out of the handle puts the blade closer to the hoof. The concavity of the drop blade fits the hoof quite nicely and allows us to find live sole without gouging. Another advantage to this type of knife is that the hook is at an angle. That prevents gouging when we're working on our frog, so that we don't gouge our bars or we don't gouge the sole as we come down on the frog. So that helps us quite a bit. The 20-degree angle of the blade helps to prevent us from digging into the foot. Many of the other knives that are out there tend to have a very steep angle and it digs into the foot. This 20-degree angle in what we call a hollow grind helps us to keep it from digging into the foot and makes it easier to find live sole. What we do to sharpen this is we've chosen a sharpener, a diamond dust sharpener, that has a contour that fits the blade nicely, as you can see. All we have to really do here is to hold the blade firmly in position at about a 20-degree angle in relationship to the floor. By holding the sharpener parallel to the floor, as we draw back across the blade with the sharpener, we can put a very sharp honed edge on our blade. This should keep your blade sharp for a very long period of time. If you do it about, each time you finish a horse, it'll help us to keep a nice sharp edge on the blade. If it does gouge, we may have to go to a belt sander or something along that lines. You should end up with a sharp blade for a very long period of time if you take care of your blade. In the application of the HPT method, I've chosen to use the Save Edge rasp. It's a good quality rasp. There are things you should know about it. One of the reasons that we use the rasp and not nippers is because the traditional landmarks for the nipper are below where we want to be when we finish the HPT method application. The Save Edge rasp, like all farrier's rasps, have 3 sides. We have the rasp side, which is a very coarse cutting, fast cutting side. We have the file side, which is much smoother and gives us much more control in the application of our planes. The heel is used by traditional farriers for undercutting for clinches, which we very seldom will use. On this end of the rasp, we have a tang, and the tang allows us to attach the handle. The handle that I have chosen is a very bulbous handle that I teach with because it is difficult to grasp, because the handle isn't meant to be held. It's meant to be used as a pivot point or a balance point. All of the control in the rasp is in the off hand, in the off end of the rasp where there are no teeth. We grasp it and apply pressure to this side and pull from our off hand so that we can establish planes on all directions. The control is here. The rasp should last for about 30 to 40 horses. You should be able to take care of it. We don't want to see it get rusty. You don't want to be dropping it. One reason for our calf caddy and for a good tool caddy is that it prevents it from being dropped in the dirt or hitting up against other tools. It should stay fairly sharp for you if you take care of it. I have one other tool that's very important within the 5th dimension of time, one that will allow us to apply pressure to a hoof that has less than ideal structure. We've developed what we call the Soulmate Therapeutic Hoof Pad. What it does is allow us to replace structure and prevent trauma and still be able to apply the pressure we need to get good growth. In the past, it has been applied with duct tape. We simply allow a horse to create an impression on the pad. It's cut to about a 1/4 inch larger than the foot, and then it is duct taped into place for 20 minutes of hand walking or a half an hour of hand walking, really depending on the condition of the horse's foot. Well, recently we've developed a boot which works very well. We have it so that we can trim the pad to fit inside of the boot, which allows for the boot to be placed on the foot via a neoprene sock and then velcroed into place so that the horse can be walked comfortably, developing the structures we need. Well, we're going to get to the application of the HPT method, but before we do, one of the things we always want to do is we want to evaluate our horse. Now, I've already walked this horse and I've watched this horse go, and if you've picked up my video on horse handling, you've seen this horse. This is Mary. She is a retired thoroughbred. She's 7 years old and is going through rehabilitation to be used as a pleasure horse. I am going to go around this horse with a set of hoof testers. You know, there's been a lot of talk about proper use of hoof testers, and what I want to do is show you a set of hoof testers that we use that help to eliminate any possibility of causing injury with hoof testers, because they can be very severe and they can cause bruising. But if used correctly, they are a valuable tool to help us determine proper structure in the horse's foot. Whereas we look at the horse, when we watch the horse move, if there was one foot that may have been suspect in a lameness, that's the last hoof we would want to go to. Much like a lie detector test, we have to establish a baseline or a foundation of information. And we do that by starting at the foot farthest away from the suspected lameness. On a thoroughbred, if she was suspected lame in the left front, we would start with that as number 4, go to the diagonal as number 3, go to the opposite hind, we'd go 4, 3, 2, and then 1. So I would start on the opposite front, go to the diagonal hind, go to the hind, and then back to the one that we suspect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pattern with the same amount of pressure and the same pattern on each foot. So what I'll do is I'll pick up the foot and show you how we do that, just like we did on our handling video. And I first have to make sure my horse is set up. I have my wife Robin handling the horse, which she is doing beautifully because she has a rope halter with a very light touch, which allows the horse to relax. She is in the right position for me to trim this foot. If I was on the opposite side, she would move to the opposite side. She is staying just about the center and controlling the head. As the head moves, the horse will move. So it's her job to make sure that the head is relatively in a neutral position. I'm going to transfer the weight to the opposite front and then to the opposite hind, apply pressure behind the knee to move it towards the head, scoop the foot to bring it up, and allow our horse to settle into the tripod. I'm going to get into position to pick this foot up and put it between my legs by being behind the withers. Again, you can review this either in the book, The Chosen Road, or in our last video, the horse handling video. So we'll move the hoof behind our leg, allow the toe to go to the ground, bring it up so that we have full exposure of the hoof. I'm going to use the tester on very distinctive spots on the foot. I'm going to start across what we call a distal border of the coffin bone by moving about a third way up the outer hoof and placing the spring-loaded head at a point about 10 and 2 to begin our testing. And I go to the first red line on my tester for 1, 2, 3 positions. I'm looking for muscle tone or a change in the body. I go to each side of the hoof and apply pressure, to each side of the frog and apply pressure diagonally across the center of the frog looking for a reaction. Same amount of pressure. I go to the outside of the bar next, the center of the bar, and apply the same amount of pressure to each bar. I then go to the back of the heels and flex the back of the foot with the same amount of pressure, looking for a change. So the positions are 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, 6, 7, and 8. That'll give us the test that we need to see if there's any discomfort in that foot, if any structure is lacking. And I'm actually dividing the foot into 3 locations: the toe area, the point of articulation across the frog, or the articulating joint, and the heel. So I'm dividing that foot into thirds and checking each area for sensitivity. I'll start on the foot farthest from the suspected foot and continue around the foot doing the same pattern on all 4 feet. If there is any noticeable difference in the response, I note it and look at the structure and see if there's anything that I can visibly see and react to. Once we've done that, we're ready to do the trim, and I'm going to map out the foot now. So I'm going to pick the foot back up. I'm going to have in hand a very valuable tool for beginners as well as professionals, and it's simply a marker. We use the marker to map out our footprint and compare it to our hoof print so we can see where we are when we start. We can evaluate the structures and apply the 10 steps of the method. So why don't we get right to that? I'm going to begin by, again, getting under this horse correctly. We're going to map out the foot. So we're going to transfer that weight over and back. Good move. Move to the back of the leg, moving it towards her head so she scoops her leg up. I come into position, toes together and heels out. Allow the toe to go down, bring it up into position. I'm going to start simply by tracing the junction of the sole to the white line. Right around the foot. Then I'm going to find the true apex, which is where that horn of the frog joins the sole, and the back between the bulbs of our central sulcus. Once I have those 2 points, I'm going to use my rasp, connecting the 2 dots to create the center line on the hoof capsule. Again, this is something that I think everybody should be doing. Once we've established our center line, then we can take the rasp, holding it parallel to the center line, come out to the lateral side or the outside to the point where we are at our widest point of our foot, and draw a line 90 degrees to my center line. Once we've established that point, we can now look at our footprint, which is established by this triangle we had talked about earlier. And in a theory video, I outlined the footprint, which consisted of the mushroom, which was the front part of the foot, and the triangle created by these 3 points. Looking at this hoof, we're in pretty good shape. If I looked at it on a spectrum of usability, it comes in at about a 3.5 to a 4, which isn't too bad for a thoroughbred off the track. The frog, you can see, is very flat. We have a very steep angle and a curve here, which has caused our bar to bend. Over here, you can see we have more of a curvature to the frog, therefore we have more of a curvature to the bar, which is an interesting thing to see. We see that quite often because the stimulus for the bar tends to be the frog. So we're going to go through our steps now, all 10 steps. And we're going to start by trimming our frog. And I can establish a cut line by taking my marker and use it like a knife blade, holding it at a 45-degree angle, pointing at my deep collateral groove. And I can establish a cut line. What that cut line does for me is allows me to establish my frog in the center of the triangle. And if I keep my cutting edge of my blade on that cut line, I can cut a nice angle without taking too much or too little. I come in on this side, I go down away from my body and establish the angle that I want. So I pulled up, got behind my blade, finished my cut, came in, turned the blade, and finished the cut. Now I have a nice angle to my frog, which will stimulate what I want for growth. The next step is to go to the live sole, which is located at the widest part of the foot, at the junction of sole and white line. Here I'm going to remove exfoliating sole, which you can see as a chalky substance, until it begins to get shiny. We see it go shiny. Come around this side and do the same thing without gouging a hole. I'm not too worried about the wall too much. Removing that exfoliation until I find, I'm just now getting to it, the shiny. I'm going to take my marker back out, and I'm going to put my marks back at the widest part of that foot, about the size of a pea. Now I'm going to take a point at the highest and widest point on my frog and more or less translate that to the center line. I'm going to take my rasp and I'm going to mirror the internal arch plane or the live sole plane by being flat on my frog or
just slightly over my frog and a 1/4 inch over the 2 points here at the live sole. That gives me a plane that I can rasp my hoof to, which will mirror the internal arch. I lower that slowly on my heels, which is the next step, and it tells me that this outside heel is a touch high. So simply by rasping and pulling across the foot on the plane, controlling the plane with my hand, offhand of rasp, I can establish purchase without going too low. On this particular foot with the structure we have, I'm not going to go any lower than the frog. I want to be right on the frog, and now I've established a plane that will mirror my live sole plane. The next step is to do the bars. All I do to the bars is level them to the live sole. There's not much bar in here. As I said, this foot is not the best in the world. And I create sharp purchase to my bars, which will start establishing my bars. The next step is to do the quarters, and I go forward to the angle of the bar, and I relieve the outer wall, just exposing the inner wall with an angle which is best suited for this foot at about 30 degrees. It depends on the foot you're on as to the angle you're going to use, and you can see now I've exposed my inner wall. I'm going to do the same on this side. My inner wall now, you can see the white, and just off the end of the foot. Next, I have to establish where my toe is, and I do that by taking a mark at the junction of the white line and sole, the apex of the frog, and visually dividing it in half. Draw a line straight across our center line, straight across our center line, and I've established my toe. I'm going to rasp at a 45-degree angle in reference to the sole plane and back up my toe so I expose my inner wall from point to point. Here's my inner wall exposed, and I went for symmetry to my white line with my inner wall. I'm going to lower the toe to the heel plane by going diagonally across the foot in each direction until the toe plane is on the same plane as the heel plane, which I'm at right now. That allows me to get my inner wall right down on there, bear some weight, a good purchase and good balance in the bottom of the foot. Okay, so now we've established a toe plane that's on parallel plane with the heel plane. We're going to do the flare now, which is the next step. We're on step 8, and we're going to take that by moving the leg forward, again, transferring that weight, getting her to bring her leg up. Now I'm going to turn my butt to the center of the horse, bringing the foot forward, and I'm going to feel for that downward movement that I demonstrated in our horse handling video. And that's where my knee is going to go. If I was using a hoof stand, that's where the hoof stand would have to go. So I put my knee there so that my cannon bone is directly under the foot, and I feel for flare. I have slight flare here, so I'll rasp from the top down, removing that flare. Not too worried about chipping right now. She's newly out of shoes, hasn't been barefoot for that long. In time, that'll take care of itself. Remember our 5th dimension of time and establishing an environment that's correct. Now to finish the flare on the opposite side, I'm going to rotate to the outside of the horse, put the foot on the opposite knee, and work the inside of the foot the same way. I'm going for symmetry to my hoof capsule. I'm using the coronary band, and just below it, I'm feeling for any pillars that might be apparent in the wall, and I'm trying to make this foot symmetrical, or the hoof symmetrical to the coronary band from top to bottom. Good. And I'm going to put this back down and get to the readdress. I always go to the shoulder, transfer the weight, knee towards the head, scooping the foot up. Once I'm into position, between the legs, down to the ground and back up. Now all I have to do now is make this hoof capsule symmetrical to my footprint. I do that with a slight angle, going forward the angle of the bar, creating the same angle around the entire hoof capsule. The next step is to take my sanding block for step 10, and we put a nice Mustang roll on this whole foot using a sanding block. Sanding blocks will last anywhere from 8 to 10 horses. These are not your normal sanding blocks. These sanding blocks are a felt foam sanding block. They're actually very difficult to find, but they are available through us. It's a nice sanding block. All right, once I have that done, you can see I have little chance of chipping. My foot is on plane in all dimensions. We have the toe back and the heel back where it belongs, so we're good on dorsal to palmar. I've addressed medial to lateral of the hoof capsule to the center line. I've addressed yaw by doing my toe and centering it, and both distal and proximal planes are in balance because we have this on plane with the live sole plane or the internal arch. I'm going to work on the hind foot now, and I always go to the shoulder first to go to the hind by transferring the weight to the opposite fore and then the opposite hind, just like I outlined in our video on horse handling. It keeps me safe, keeps the horse comfortable. It allows me to take that hind leg and move it towards the head, allow it to come back in an arc that we want, opening up our window of opportunity here, which allows me to put my knees through. I'm ready to go to the trim. We're going to mark up that foot. Get my good frog. I'm actually going to go to my live sole at the widest part of the foot, looking for my live sole, and there it is, nice and shiny. Same here, it's nice and shiny. Shows me how imbalanced I am by taking my points. Come across on top of that foot, looking straight down on, come down, a little bit high on the inside. Great purchase, bringing it down to a height, about a credit card height above my frog on the average horse. On a pony, we could go a little closer due to the size and weight of the horse. On a draft horse, we want to maybe leave about as much as a quarter of an inch in height over the frog to compensate. What that'll do is leave the whole foot higher to compensate for the extra weight. Now we finished our bars, so we went to step 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good job, keep going.
We're going to relieve our quarters, exposing the inner wall. As soon as I see my top edge of my angle, expose my inner wall, I move forward with my rasp. It's almost like paddling a boat. I'm going to mark up my toe by taking and divide my apex and white line in half, draw a line across the center line, and back up my toe, exposing the inner wall. It'll be 2/3 of it, making it symmetrical to the junction of the sole to the white line. Next step is to lower my toe plane to a plane parallel to my live sole plane at the same height as my heel. Next step is flare. So I'm going to go do the outside flare first. Feeling here for flare. Working down the foot, removing the flare from the top, down. To do the inside, I'm going to face the horse with the foot on my knee by going the opposite direction. This way. There, girl. Relax here in this position. to take off my flare. Once my flare is removed, I'm going to go back to the bottom for the readdress. Being careful of my tools. Always put them out of the way for safety. Go to the bottom. Readdress the foot by making the hoof print symmetrical to the footprint. Removing any points that are way out. Creating the angle around the foot, exposing the inner wall to the ground. Relieving the outer wall. With the completion of that, I can do my Mustang roll with my sanding block. Simply by addressing at an angle to the wall, removing all the rough spots, all the way around the foot. If I see that I have some thin wall due to either infection or lack of inner wall, a lot of times I'll just relieve it, put an angle on it so it increases the surface area, yet still have my purchase in my heels. That'll prevent it from breaking out anyway. I'll do the same on this one here. Just slightly. We see that sometimes. You'll see people think it's dipping the quarter. Actually, I'm just relieving it to prevent chipping and breaking. As long as I have good purchase in the heels and throughout the foot, I'm safe. That's the completed trim. Now that we've completed the trim, we have to look to the fifth dimension. We put the foot into balance on 4 dimensions, but that fifth dimension of time takes hold now. And it's important that we look at the structures that we have and determine what needs to be done with the structures we have. As we look at this hoof, you can see that we have weak inner wall and we have bruising throughout the white line. You can see the bruising is in evidence at the toe, possibly from having a high toe plane. We have lack of purchase at the heels and bent bars. We've addressed that by putting the angle on the frog. Now we need to put some pressure on this foot. We may benefit from working in a sand or school ring. We would benefit from pads on this horse. It would take about 20 minutes a day or a half an hour a day of hand walking this horse in a sand ring to begin with, or the application of a pad. So if we take something like a Soulmate pad, the horse would make the impression, we'd cut the pad to fit and duct tape it on, or in the near future we have the boot which will be able to be used, and this horse would be walked for 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day to develop the structures we need. Each time we pick up this foot and address it, we want to apply all 10 steps. Whether we do the steps or not, or do the trim or not, depends on the structures we have. If you maintain this on a weekly basis, going through all 10 steps, it's very likely that you'll never have to put a complete trim on the foot again. You just maintain it, and as the foot develops and you begin to ride your horse the way you want to ride your horse, the foot self-maintains. Well, that's about it for the HPT method. I hope you'll look into our other videos for further information on horse handling, on the theory, the very important theory on how to get the structures back properly, as well as a dissection so you can see what's going on inside.